had no idea what I was getting myself into when I decided to go camping alone that weekend. A small, quiet trip to get away from everything, clear my head. Just me, my gear, and the wilderness. The day I arrived at the campsite, the weather was perfect. Sunny, not a cloud in the sky, a light breeze keeping the air cool. The campsite was nestled in the woods, far enough from the main road that I knew I wouldn't be disturbed. I liked it that way. There was a lake nearby, the kind of place where you could spend hours just sitting by the shore, lost in thought. Setting up my tent was quick. I made sure to stake everything down properly, just in case the wind picked up later. I had a small campfire going in no time, the crackle of the flames filling the air as I sat back on my camp chair, enjoying the peace and quiet. Felt good to be out here, alone. No distractions, no people, just nature. As the sun began to set, the temperature dropped a little. I pulled on my jacket and sat by the fire, thinking about the week ahead. I had planned to stay out here for 3 days, no rush, just me and the trees. It was a nice change from the noise of the city. That's when I saw the cat. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. There was a movement in the trees, something small and quick, but I couldn't make it out clearly. I stood up, trying to get a better look, and there it was again. A small, grayish cat, darting between the trees, its eyes glowing briefly in the firelight. I wasn't too surprised. Wild cats weren't unheard of in these parts. Sometimes, even stray domestic cats would wander into the woods, searching for food or shelter. I'd seen it happen before when I had gone camping with friends. It wasn't unusual, but there was something different about this one. It wasn't the way it looked. It wasn't even the way it moved. It was just how normal it seemed. It didn't act skittish or wild, the way a typical stray might. It acted like a house cat, as though it belonged there. It didn't try to sneak around or keep its distance. It just walked right into my camp, tail high, looking around like it owned the place. I stood still, watching it. The cat didn't seem to notice me, or if it did, it didn't care. It made its way right past my campfire, sniffing the ground, moving casually as though it was a regular thing to do. I thought about calling it over, but I didn't. I didn't really want to encourage it. I was here for solitude, after all. For a while, the cat just wandered around, its movements slow and deliberate, like it was checking out the place. It would pause, look around, and then continue its path, like it was in no rush. I figured it must have been a stray, looking for food or shelter for the night. Maybe it would leave in the morning. I didn't think much of it at first. Cats were fairly common in the woods, especially around campsites. They were often there for the food people left behind or to hunt small animals. But something about this cat kept catching my attention. It wasn't afraid. By the time the sky had darkened fully, the cat was still around. It had made its way to the edge of the camp, where I had left some of my gear. I watched it for a while, wondering what it was doing. Cats usually didn't hang around human camps, especially this long. They were usually in and out, moving quickly, not lingering. But this one, it was different. It didn't act like a wild animal at all. It didn't even seem interested in the food I had out for dinner. It didn't even look at the fish I'd brought to grill, which was odd for any cat. Normally, they'd go straight for food, but not this one. I sat back in my chair, staring at the fire, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. It was just a cat. Maybe it had gotten used to humans over time, but it still felt off. After some time, I decided to turn in for the night. The cat was still hanging around. By now, it had come closer to the tent, sitting down just a few feet away from me. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark as it watched me, unmoving. I wondered if it was waiting for me to do something, but I just went inside the tent, zipped it up, and tried to ignore it. The night passed uneventfully. I didn't hear any strange noises or anything out of the ordinary. But the next morning, when I stepped outside, I was met with a chilling sight. The cat was still there. It was lying right outside my tent, curled up in a little ball, as though it had been there all night. I didn't remember hearing it, but I also didn't really remember much after I crawled into my sleeping bag. I stood there for a few moments trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The cat didn't move, didn't even acknowledge my presence. It just lay there, its fur ruffled from the night's cold air. Something about it was still bothering me. It had spent the whole night here. Cats didn't do that. They didn't stay with you like that. They weren't pets. They were wild animals. But this one, it seemed so calm, too normal. As I bent down to pack up my things, the cat stood up and stretched. It didn't jump or move quickly, just slowly and deliberately, like it had all the time in the world. Then, it turned and walked off into the woods, just like it had the day before. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the strange feeling gnawing at me. Maybe it was just lonely. Maybe it was used to people. I couldn't let myself get paranoid. It was just a cat. The next day, though, it came back. And again, it acted like nothing was unusual. It walked right into my camp, its tail held high, completely unbothered by my presence. It didn't try to avoid me or hide. It just moved through the camp like it belonged there, and then sat down by the fire as though waiting for something. I watched it for a while, trying to decide if I should leave. But I didn't want to pack up early. I liked the camp. I liked the quiet, so I stayed. But something felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that the cat was watching me. It wasn't until the third night, when I woke up in the middle of the night, that I realized just how wrong it was. I had fallen asleep with the tent flaps slightly open, just enough to feel the cool night air. I woke up with a start, feeling like I wasn't alone. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. Then I saw it, the cat. It was sitting at the edge of my tent, staring at me. It was as if it had been waiting for me to wake up. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and it didn't move when I shifted in my sleeping bag. It just stared at me. I couldn't understand it. Why was it still here? Why hadn't it left? I stared back at the cat, trying to make sense of everything. I had never heard it before, not once. It hadn't made a sound. It hadn't even tried to make itself known. It had simply watched. I realized then that it hadn't just been the past couple of days. It had been there every night, watching me. That was the moment I understood. The cat wasn't just a random stray. It had been following me. It had been there the whole time, watching, waiting, like it had a purpose. Something about it felt wrong, unnatural. I couldn't explain it, but it was there, deep in my gut. The same feeling that had been gnawing at me since the first time I saw it. I wasn't going to wait around to find out. I didn't care why it was there. I didn't care what it wanted. I packed up my things, grabbed my gear, and left the campsite. It wasn't until I reached the main road that I finally looked back. The cat was standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. I don't know why it followed me. I don't know what it wanted. But I do know this, it wasn't just a cat. It wasn't just a stray. It was something else. Something watching me, and I never went back to that campsite. I always liked camping more than most people I knew. Something about being outside, away from the constant buzzing of town life, helped me slow down and breathe a little better. I wasn't a survival expert or anything, but I'd been doing it long enough to know how to keep myself safe and comfortable in the woods. I'd never had anything go seriously wrong. My gear was solid. I knew how to start a fire, filter water, and keep food stored properly. I wasn't reckless. I just liked the quiet. That weekend, I took my wife and kids out to a spot I'd been to a couple times before. It was about a half-mile off a gravel forestry road, tucked into a clearing next to a small creek. There were tall pines all around, plenty of shade during the day, and you could hear the water moving across the rocks if everything else was quiet. I brought our dog too, Remy, a mid-sized mutt, mostly lab but with something else mixed in. She was a good trail dog, smart and calm, but alert when she needed to be. We set up camp in the afternoon, got the tents in place, unrolled the sleeping bags, and got the fire going before the sun dipped too low. It was early fall, warm enough during the day that you could wear a t-shirt, but it dropped fast after sunset. I made dinner over the fire, just some sausages and foil-packed potatoes, and we sat around for a bit while the kids played with sticks and ran around the edge of the site. It was one of those simple, quiet evenings that reminds you why camping is worth the effort. By the time it was full dark, the kids were tired and ready for bed. My wife crawled into the tent with them, and I stayed out by the fire with a couple beers and Remy lying next to my chair. The fire was crackling just enough to keep me warm, and the stars were out overhead. No moon that night, just layers of black and silver above the treetops. It was the kind of night I liked best. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular, just sitting, sipping beer, and watching the shadows stretch out as the fire sank lower. The forest never really gets quiet. There's always some rustling, some chirping, distant movements you can't quite place. I was used to it. Most of it is harmless. Mice, bugs, maybe a raccoon. Sometimes a deer if you're lucky. Remy shifted next to me. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Then she sat up stiff, ears forward, body tense. Her whole focus went toward the trees off to my left. She didn't bark, but she let out a low, deep growl from her chest. The kind of sound dogs make when they're not sure if they should be warning or fighting. I set my beer down, stood up, and followed her gaze. I couldn't see anything at first. It was dark beyond the fire's reach, and the trees created heavy shadows. But something was out there. I knew that feeling well enough. The hair on the back of my neck lifted a little. I walked over to my gear and pulled out the flashlight. A strong one, wide beam, long range. I clicked it on and scanned the edge of the woods. It took a few passes before I saw it. Two eyes, glowing a bit in the light, reflecting that unmistakable animal shine. I stopped moving the flashlight and focused on it. The eyes didn't move. They just stared straight back at me. Then the shape around the eyes started to fill in. It was low to the ground at first, but then it stood up slow and fluid, and I saw the full outline. Long body, big shoulders, smooth tail. A mountain lion. It was about 100 yards away, maybe a bit more. Close enough to see clearly through the flashlight beam. It was standing there, dead still, looking straight at me and Remy. My pulse kicked up. I've seen them before, but always at a distance, and always from the safety of a car or a good ridgeline. This was different. This thing had been watching us, and I hadn't noticed until Remy picked it up. I had no idea how long it had been there. I stayed still. Remy was at my side now, hackles raised, still growling low. I kept the light on it, not wanting to give it a chance to disappear without me knowing where it went. For a while, it didn't move at all, just stared. I thought about yelling, throwing something, trying to scare it off, but it didn't feel right. I didn't want to make a sudden move. My family was 20 feet behind me, asleep in a tent. Eventually, the lion shifted. It didn't leap or run. It just turned slowly, deliberately, and started walking back into the trees. It vanished in maybe 10 seconds. The woods swallowed it up like it had never been there. I stood still for a long time after that, kept the flashlight scanning, moving in slow, deliberate sweeps. My heart was still beating hard, and my mouth had gone dry. I walked back over to my chair, still holding the flashlight, and sat down again. Remy didn't relax. She sat there, ears twitching, eyes watching the woods. I tossed a few more logs on the fire, mostly for light, partly for comfort. I didn't drink the rest of the beer. I just watched and listened. It's strange how calm everything else stayed. The wind moved the trees a little. Crickets kept chirping. Nothing screamed or scattered. The forest didn't panic. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew that lion had been closer than I'd ever want something like that to be. I stayed out for another hour or two, long after the fire should have died down, long after I normally would have crawled into the tent. I didn't hear or see anything else. When I finally did go to bed, I kept the flashlight next to me and didn't really sleep. Every little sound made me freeze up. I imagined claws scraping the ground, imagined the soft padding of feet around the edge of the camp. I didn't feel safe until the sun started coming up. The next morning, I didn't say anything to the kids. No point in scaring them. We made breakfast, packed up, and hiked back to the truck. I didn't see any fresh tracks, though I looked. No signs of it. No scat, no kills, nothing to prove what I saw. But it stayed with me, still does, because what really got into my head wasn't just seeing it. It was thinking about how long it had been there, watching, quiet, 100 yards away, maybe closer before Remy noticed. Maybe it had come in from behind at first. Maybe it had circled the camp and stopped only when the dog reacted. And that's just the time I caught it. I started thinking back on all the nights I'd sat alone by a fire like that. All the times I let the woods go dark around me, thinking I was alone. I've done that probably 100 times or more, but maybe I wasn't alone. Maybe they'd been there before. Maybe they'd watched me from just far enough away, waiting, curious, testing the line between wild and tame. Now I don't sit by the fire with my back to the trees. I keep the flashlight out. I sleep lighter, and I listen harder, because once you see what's out there, what's really out there, you can't go back to pretending it's not. I've been planning the trip for weeks. Just a short solo camping trip out to a place I'd heard about from someone I used to work with. It wasn't an official campground. No paved spots or restroom facilities, just a stretch of flat land next to a river, about 2 hours away from the nearest highway. He had told me it was quiet, untouched, a good place to disconnect. That was all I needed to hear. I left early on a Friday morning, packed light but smart. My tent, a sleeping bag, a small cooler with some simple food, and a decent-sized backpack with my essentials. I brought water, a first aid kit, a camp stove, and all the stuff I usually bring when I go out alone. I had done trips like this before, and I always stuck to the same rules: stay sharp, stay aware, and keep things simple. The trail to the river wasn't marked on any map, just something he'd sketched on a piece of paper. It took a bit of effort to find the path, but once I did, it was a straight shot through some dense pine woods. The hike in took me about an hour and a half. The trail was narrow and overgrown in spots, but it wasn't too hard to follow. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. No road noise, no planes overhead, no signs of people. That's exactly what I wanted. When I reached the river, I was impressed. It was everything I hoped it would be. The trees opened up to a wide, flat area covered in dry pine needles and mossy patches, and the river flowed steady and cold just a few feet away. There was even a natural fire pit, just a circle of blackened rocks, probably from other campers who had found the place before me. I set up my tent about 20 feet from the river, with the opening facing the water. Felt like a perfect spot. After I got the tent up, I gathered some wood, got a fire going, and made a small lunch. I sat by the river for a while, just watching the water move. There was a stillness to the place that I liked. I could hear the breeze shifting through the trees and the occasional snap of a twig somewhere in the distance. No engines, no voices, nothing that reminded me of home. That first day passed quickly. I did a bit of exploring up and down the riverbank, followed a deer trail through the brush, and came back just as the sun was starting to dip behind the trees. I made a simple dinner, beans and rice heated over the fire, and ate while the sky went dark. When night came, it came fast. There weren't any streetlights or camp lanterns around, so once the sun was gone, it was black. The fire was the only thing lighting up the clearing. The stars were out, bright and sharp through the gaps in the trees, and the river sounded louder in the dark. I threw on a hoodie and sat by the fire for a while, just thinking. I didn't feel afraid or anything. I'd camped alone before. I knew the sounds of the woods, the creaks, the rustles, the chirps. But I'll admit, that first night, I kept turning around. Not because I heard anything strange, but just because something felt a little off. I turned in around 10. I zipped up the tent, crawled into my sleeping bag, and lay there listening to the river. I heard a few branches snap in the woods nearby, but I didn't think much of it. Animals move around at night. Deer, raccoons, even porcupines. It's normal. I told myself that a dozen times before I finally drifted off. At some point in the night, I woke up. I wasn't sure why. There wasn't a sound or a movement that pulled me out of sleep. It was just this feeling, like I needed to be awake. I lay there for a few minutes, listening hard. The river was still going, steady and low. The wind had died down. No footsteps, no animals, nothing. Just silence. I figured it was nothing and rolled over, falling back asleep after a while. The next morning, everything looked fine. The tent was untouched. Nothing had been moved. I got up, stretched, and made some coffee. I checked around the camp to make sure no animals had gotten into my food. The fire pit was cold but undisturbed. I didn't see any tracks or signs of anything. Still, I had that same feeling I'd had in the night, like something had been watching. I shook it off. I told myself I was just adjusting to the quiet. I spent the second day walking upriver, staying close to the waterline so I wouldn't lose my bearings. The forest was dense, but not too bad if you stuck to the flatter ground. I brought a small lunch and ate it while sitting on a fallen log. I didn't see another person, or even signs of one. Just squirrels, birds, and a snake or two. The deeper I went, the more I noticed how quiet it was. No distant chainsaws, no dogs barking, no planes. Just the wind, the river, and the occasional call of a bird. I liked it, but I also kept checking over my shoulder. When I got back to camp that afternoon, I noticed something. A rock had moved. One of the rocks in the fire ring. It wasn't a big deal. Animals can bump into things, but it was turned on its side, and it looked like something had been placed underneath it. When I lifted it, there was nothing there. Just a patch of dry earth. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out if I had moved it and forgotten. I didn't think I had, but maybe I had kicked it by accident before I left. I made myself believe that. That night, I stayed up later, keeping the fire going longer than usual. I sat with my back to the tent, so I could see everything in front of me. I didn't hear anything weird, just the usual snaps and rustles. But I had this feeling again, like I wasn't alone. Couldn't shake it. When I finally crawled into the tent, I made sure everything was zip tight and my flashlight was close. I lay there in the dark, listening, trying not to focus on every sound. But after a while, I heard something that made me freeze. It was soft at first, a gentle shuffle of feet, human feet, moving slowly through the pine needles outside my tent. Not the quick scatter of an animal. It was deliberate, slow. I held my breath. The sound circled the tent. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. The steps stopped near the fire pit. I waited. A full minute passed. Then another. Nothing. I finally mustered the courage to look. I unzipped the tent just a few inches and peeked out. The fire was low but still throwing some light. I couldn't see anyone. Nothing moved. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. The steps were real. Someone had been out there. I stayed awake most of that night, staring at the tent ceiling, listening for anything. But nothing came back. No more steps. No voices. Just the river and the wind. At first light, I got up and checked the campsite. I looked for footprints, disturbed leaves, anything. I didn't find much. The ground was too soft in some places, too hard in others. But one thing I did notice, another rock in the fire ring had been moved. Turned just slightly, like someone had nudged it. That was enough for me. I packed my things as fast as I could, stuffing my gear into the backpack without bothering to fold it neatly. I doused the fire, took one last look at the woods, and started the hike back to the trailhead. About 10 minutes into the hike, I noticed something else. A break in the brush that hadn't been there before. A small path leading away from the trail. It was fresh, branches still bent, pine needles recently disturbed. Someone had been walking through there, maybe watching, maybe close. I didn't stop. I didn't look deeper. I just kept walking, pushing myself to move faster. I was sweating hard, even though the air was cool. I didn't stop until I saw the edge of the clearing where I'd left my car. I threw my gear into the back seat, got in, and drove. I didn't feel safe until I hit the highway and saw other cars. I didn't go back to that place. I haven't camped alone since. And the scariest part of it all was that nothing actually happened. No one attacked me. No one tried to take anything. But someone was out there, watching me, moving through the trees when they thought I was asleep. Moving rocks, getting closer. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a story to laugh about. It was real. Just a person. Flesh and blood. Someone who knew those woods better than I did. Someone who knew how to stay hidden. Someone who liked being out there, watching. And that's the part one can't let go of. Because I never saw their face. And I never will. I was never big on camping. Not really. I grew up around city noise, concrete, and fast food. Not trees and silence and waking up to condensation inside a tent. But when my buddy Mark invited me on a weekend trip out near some lake he swore was paradise, I said yes. He had a way of making things sound like they'd be a good time, and after a rough few months at work, I figured I needed it. The plan was simple. 3 nights, 2 coolers full of beer, 1 borrowed tent, and not a single notification from the outside world. The lake was a couple of hours from where we lived. We got there late Friday afternoon. It was one of those long, drawn-out summer evenings where the heat just lingered and the air buzzed with insects you couldn't see. The campground was mostly empty. A few cars were parked along the tree line, and some tents were set up down by the water, but it wasn't crowded. Good. I liked that. Mark had brought along his golden retriever, Lucy. Big, floppy thing with eyes that made you feel guilty even if you hadn't done anything wrong. She'd run ahead of us down the path, tail wagging, tongue out, already acting like she owned the place. We found a good spot, a wide clearing about 30 feet from the lake with a fire pit already dug out by whoever had used it last. The trees surrounded the spot in a semicircle, but it opened up enough to let light through. You could see the stars if the sky cooperated, Mark said. We pitched the tent with some fumbling and arguing and eventually got it standing. It wasn't perfect, but it would keep the bugs out. By sundown, we had the fire going. The beer was cold, the air was soft and warm, and for a while, everything felt good. Lucy laid down between us, tail twitching every so often, her head snapping up whenever she heard a noise off in the woods. We laughed every time she jumped. There was a woodpecker out there that wouldn't shut up, and she'd get up, growl half-heartedly, then flop back down. Around the 3rd beer, Mark started tossing a tennis ball for her. She loved that ball, would have chased it into traffic if you let her. She'd bring it back every time, drop it at your feet, tail going a mile a minute. And Mark kept making a show of fake-outs, pretending to throw it, then hiding it behind his back. Lucy would go nuts trying to guess which hand it was in. Classic dog games. But I remember that moment. It was around the 5th or 6th beer, and Mark was already getting sloppy. He tossed the ball into the shadows, just past the ring of firelight. Lucy tore off after it, nails kicking up dirt. And then nothing. She didn't come back. We waited maybe 15 seconds, maybe 30, then called out. No barking, no rustling, no panting return. Mark stood up and whistled. Still nothing. I grabbed a flashlight and swept it over the trees. The beam bounced off trunks and brush but didn't catch anything. The ball was bright green, and Lucy's collar had a little reflector on it. We didn't see either. We figured she must have chased it into the woods. Mark cursed, downed the rest of his beer, and went stumbling toward the trees. I followed him, my flashlight jittering across the path. The undergrowth was thick, even for a campground trail, and the path twisted fast. We kept calling out, just her name over and over. Lucy, Lucy. The silence was the part that started getting to me. No bugs, no frogs, no wind, just our feet crunching dry leaves and the distant splash of water behind us. Eventually we gave up, thinking she'd find her way back. We headed back to the fire and sat there, waiting. The beer didn't taste as good anymore. I tried to joke about her chasing raccoons or how she'd probably end up in someone else's camp getting fed hot dogs. But Mark wasn't laughing. An hour passed, then another. By midnight, Mark was up pacing, muttering to himself. I was tired and a little buzzed and told him to give it till morning. Dogs always came back, but he was wired, kept standing there, facing the woods like he was waiting for something. Eventually, we both crawled into the tent and tried to sleep. I didn't. The night was too still. Not in a peaceful way either. Just quiet in that weird, pressurized way that makes you feel like something's watching you. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I remember waking up just after dawn to the sound of rustling outside the tent. For a second, I thought it was Lucy. I sat up, unzipped the tent flap quietly, and peeked out. Nothing. No dog. Just a breeze moving the leaves. The fire was dead. The embers were cold. I got out, stretched, then started walking the perimeter of the campsite. I figured maybe she'd wandered back and curled up somewhere. But after a full circle, I didn't see her. I did notice something, though, about 50 feet off to the left of the fire pit. Just at the edge of where the trees started thickening, the ground was disturbed, like something had been pacing or circling there. I walked over. Footprints. Big ones. Dog-shaped, but deep. Too deep for Lucy. She wasn't that heavy. I crouched down, tried to match them up with her tracks from the day before, but something was off. The stride was long, longer than any dog I'd seen, and there were drag marks, like something had been pulled. I followed them for maybe 30 yards before they vanished into underbrush. I stood there a long time, just staring, listening. I didn't hear anything. No growl, no panting, no bark. Nothing. Back at camp, Mark was still in the tent. I didn't wake him. I didn't even tell him about the tracks. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't understand them myself. He woke up about an hour later and went straight to the tree line again, calling her name like she'd suddenly show up if he just yelled louder. Eventually he gave up and said we needed to look again, so we grabbed our boots, filled 2 bottles of water, and went in. We covered the same ground as the night before, but this time we kept going. We marked trees with sticks, left little piles of rocks so we wouldn't lose our direction. The trail started fading about half a mile in. Trees got closer together. The ground got soft and wet. At one point, we had to cross a shallow stream that nearly took my boot. We found part of a dead raccoon. Flies buzzing, ribs showing. But that wasn't weird. Animals die. Then we found the collar. It was maybe 20 feet from the stream, hanging on a branch like someone had placed it there. No scratches on it. No bite marks. Just the metal tag glinting in the sun. Mark didn't say anything, just stared at it. We stood there, listening again. And then we heard something. A soft thud. Not loud, just heavy, like a body hitting the ground far off. We turned around fast. Mark grabbed a broken branch like it would help. I didn't have anything. We waited. Nothing else came. The woods were still. That's when we decided to go back. It didn't feel right. We weren't prepared. No compass, no real supplies, no weapons. And whatever was out there wasn't just some curious animal. Back at camp, we packed up. Didn't talk much. Just tore down the tent, threw everything into the car, and left the firewood behind. It was only halfway through the second day, but we didn't care. The whole trip felt wrong now. I asked Mark what he thought happened. He just shook his head. Didn't say a word for the rest of the drive. Didn't play music. Didn't stop for gas until we hit a major road. When we got back to town, he got out and said thanks for coming, then walked inside without even waiting for me to say anything. I didn't see him for a while after that, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. When I finally did, he looked different. Lost weight. Eyes kind of sunken in. I asked about Lucy, and he just nodded like she died, but he hadn't really accepted it yet. Then I saw it. In the back of his yard, chained to a post, was another dog. Bigger.
Taller.
Looked part retriever, but off. Lean and long-legged. Golden coat but duller, like old straw. It didn't wag its tail. Just stared. Eyes too wide, too still. Mark said he found it a week after we got back. Said it followed him home from a gas station. No tag, no chip, just showed up. He called it Lucy. I never went back to that lake. I still think about the tracks, the collar, that dragging trail. And sometimes when I drive by Mark's place at night, I see that dog sitting by the fence, watching. It never barks, it never wags, just sits there, like it's waiting for someone to throw the ball. I had been walking for what felt like hours, the ground soft beneath my boots, the trees towering above me like silent sentinels. The air was thick with the earthy scent of damp moss and rotting leaves. It had rained the night before, and the woods seemed to hold onto that moisture, the trees slick with it. I didn't mind. I liked the silence, the solitude of being out here, away from everything. It was supposed to be a simple hike. I'd set out that morning from my car, heading into a part of the forest I hadn't explored before. There was a trail, marked by faded white blazes on the trees, but after a while, it had faded into something less defined. I didn't mind that either. The woods had a way of making me feel small, insignificant even. There was something peaceful about it, like the world outside didn't exist here. I'd gone off the trail a bit, just to explore, to stretch my legs and see what I could find. The further I walked, the less I felt connected to the usual world. I was in a different kind of space now. The usual sounds of the forest were muffled. No birds, No animals scurrying through the underbrush, just an oppressive quiet. I paused and looked around. The trees were close together here, their trunks gnarled and twisted. A few of them were dead, their limbs bare and jagged against the sky. Their presence felt off, like they didn't belong, but I didn't think much of it at the time. It was only when I noticed something on the ground that I started to feel uncomfortable. There was a patch of dirt, mostly covered by leaves, but something in it looked strange, like something had been dragged through it. I knelt down to take a closer look. The marks were faint, but the impression of something heavy, something large, had left an indent. The earth around it was disturbed, and a few broken branches lay scattered in the area. I frowned. It wasn't an animal track. No, this was something else. I stood up, scanning the area. That's when I saw it. A glimpse of something just beyond the trees, moving between the trunks. I froze, my heart kicking into overdrive. It wasn't much, just a shadow, but it was enough to send a cold chill creeping down my spine. I shouldn't have gone after it. I knew that. The woods were dangerous, even if they didn't seem it. But my curiosity got the best of me. I wasn't lost, at least not yet, and the idea of following whatever it was had a magnetic pull. I stepped lightly, trying to make as little noise as possible. The underbrush was thick, the ground uneven, but I pushed forward, feeling like something was drawing me in. The more I moved, the more I felt like the forest was closing in around me. The trees were so thick now that the light barely reached the ground, and the air felt colder. I didn't see the figure again, but I could feel something watching me, lurking just out of sight. My instincts told me to turn back, but I ignored them. The sense of being observed only grew stronger, and I kept pushing forward, deeper into the woods. Then suddenly the world shifted. The trees ahead of me opened up into a small clearing, and in the center, there was something that made my blood run cold. A large pile of what looked like animal bones lay in the middle, half buried in the dirt. There were pieces of fur tangled in the bones, remnants of something that had once been alive. My stomach turned. I took a step back, instinctively reaching for my phone, but the signal was weak, just a few bars that barely made a dent in the empty feeling in my gut. I looked around the clearing. The bones weren't just scattered. They were arranged in a way that looked intentional, like someone or something had placed them there. The air felt thick with something dark, and a heavy sense of unease settled over me. I didn't know what to do. My feet were rooted to the ground, my mind racing. This wasn't right. None of this was right. But what really struck me, what really made my heart skip a beat, was the realization that I wasn't alone anymore. From the edge of the clearing, barely visible between the trees, I saw movement. Not the shadow of a person or an animal, but something much larger, much darker. It was big, too big for any animal I knew to live in these woods. I froze again, my breath catching in my throat. Whatever it was watching me, and I could feel its eyes boring into me from the darkness. I didn't know what to do. I was in the middle of nowhere, with no clear path back, and now it seemed like whatever had been following me was getting closer. I looked over my shoulder, my mind racing. Should I run? Should I stay still? I didn't have much of a choice. The figure took a step forward, and I could hear the crunch of leaves underfoot, slow and deliberate. My body reacted before my mind had a chance to decide what to do. I turned and ran. I didn't look back, not even for a second. I could hear something behind me now, something large, moving fast through the woods, crashing through the undergrowth. I pushed myself harder, dodging trees and rocks, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My foot caught on something, a root or a rock, and I stumbled, falling to the ground hard. My hands scraped against the dirt, and I felt the sting of a branch across my face. I had no time to even check for injuries. I scrambled to my feet, my legs shaking, and kept running. I wasn't sure how long I ran for, but eventually, the sounds of whatever was chasing me started to fade. I didn't dare slow down until I was sure I had put enough distance between myself and whatever that thing was. The woods were still and silent again, but the air felt charged, like something was still out there, waiting. I stumbled back onto the trail, my mind still racing. I didn't stop until I saw the clearing where my car was parked. The sun was beginning to set now, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I didn't care. I just wanted to get out. When I finally reached my car, I slammed the door behind me, locking it immediately. I sat there for a moment, trying to calm myself, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. My heart was still pounding, my mind replaying everything that had happened. I didn't go back to the woods after that. I've never told anyone about what I saw or heard out there, but I know one thing for sure. I was being hunted. Whatever that thing was, it was watching me the whole time, waiting for the right moment to strike. And I'm certain it's still out there, somewhere, deep in the woods, waiting for the next person to wander too far. I started camping late in life. I wasn't raised around it. I didn't grow up pitching tents in the woods or learning how to start fires with flint. I was a city guy working long hours in an office, staring at spreadsheets and blinking monitors. But in my mid-30s, after a rough breakup and a growing need to disconnect from everything, I decided to try getting out into nature. Not the kind of nature you find in parks next to paved jogging trails and dog walkers. I mean real nature. Remote, empty, silent. It was a random Thursday in June when I packed up my old Toyota SUV with a tent, a sleeping bag, a cooler full of food, and a bunch of gear I probably didn't need. I was heading toward the foothills of the Rockies, about 3 hours from where I lived. I'd looked up a few primitive camping spots, places off fire roads and rarely used trails where people were allowed to set up camp. But there were no facilities, no rangers, no other campers. That was exactly what I wanted. Just me, the woods, and whatever was out there. I drove through small towns, past gas stations that looked abandoned, and finally onto a dirt road that twisted up into the hills. After about 40 minutes of rattling over rocks and potholes, I found a wide, flat spot next to a thick patch of pine trees. It looked undisturbed, no tire tracks, no signs of campers. Perfect. I got out, stretched my legs, and felt the quiet immediately. No engines, no talking, just wind moving through trees and the occasional bird call. It was cooler up here, and the air felt clean. I set up my tent about 20 yards from the SUV and laid out a tarp to sit on. I cracked open a beer and watched the sun drop behind the trees. That first night was peaceful. I didn't build a fire because I wasn't in the mood to gather wood, and honestly, I kind of liked the dark. I had a flashlight and a headlamp, but I mostly sat in silence, listening. A couple of times I heard animals in the brush, probably rabbits or raccoons, but nothing too close. I ate a cold sandwich, drank a couple more beers, and eventually crawled into the tent. It was colder than I expected. Even in June, the night air up there bit through my sleeping bag. I pulled the zipper all the way up and used my hoodie as a pillow. I fell asleep to the sound of pine needles rustling outside. I woke up once during the night, not from a sound exactly, but from a feeling. It was probably around 3 or 4 a.m. The kind of dark where you can't see your own hand. I wasn't panicking or anything, but I was wide awake and alert, like my body knew something I didn't. I stayed still, breathing slow, listening. First, all I could hear was wind. Then I heard a single snap. A sharp crack like a stick being stepped on. Came from behind the tent, maybe 20 feet back where the trees were denser. I held my breath. The sound didn't come again. No footsteps, no movement, just that one snap. After a couple of minutes, I told myself it was probably a branch falling or a deer passing through. I eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I shook off the weird feeling. I made some coffee on my camp stove, ate a protein bar, and walked around a bit. The ground behind my tent didn't show anything obvious. No footprints or disturbed ground. But then again, the forest floor here was a mess of pine needles and soft dirt. Tracks wouldn't show unless something heavy left them. That day, I decided to explore. I left the tent and gear as it was and took a small pack with water, a knife, and a couple snacks. I had a good sense of direction, and I made mental notes about landmarks so I could find my way back. I hiked north for a while, moving through thickets and over ridges. I wasn't following a trail. This part of the forest was raw. No signs, no blaze marks, nothing but trees and silence. After a couple of hours, I came across something odd. It was an old camp, not like mine. This one had clearly been there a long time. There was a collapsed tent, bleached and torn like it had gone through several winters. Scattered cans of food, rusted and dented, lay around. A broken folding chair leaned sideways against a tree. The weirdest thing was a small pile of rocks stacked in a perfect tower next to the remains of a fire ring. I didn't touch anything, but I walked around slowly, trying to imagine what had happened here. It didn't feel right. I wasn't scared exactly, but I had this creeping feeling in the back of my head, like I'd walked into someone else's space, a place I wasn't supposed to find. I turned back and headed toward my own camp, keeping a steady pace and checking over my shoulder more than I wanted to admit. I got back in the late afternoon, sweaty and tired. Everything looked the same. Tent untouched, cooler still latched. But something felt off. I didn't realize what it was until after dinner. When I opened my pack and noticed my knife was missing, I was sure I had it when I left that morning. I remembered sliding it into the side pouch. It was a fixed blade in a sheath, pretty large, not the kind of thing you lose by accident. I searched the SUV, the tent, even checked the path I walked in on, but it was gone. I spent the rest of the evening with that same sense of unease. I didn't drink. I didn't build a fire again, which I now regret. As it got darker, I sat in the tent with the flashlight on low and the zipper pulled tight. I didn't sleep much that night. Every small sound made me flinch. Around 2 a.m., I heard something outside. Not a twig snap this time. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Someone or something was circling the tent. I stayed completely still. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. The steps moved behind me, then stopped. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then silence. I waited for what felt like an hour. Eventually, I unzipped the tent a few inches and looked out. My flashlight was in my hand, but I didn't turn it on right away. When I did, I swept the beam in an arc, slowly. Nothing, just trees and shadows. But about 10 feet from the tent, I saw something on the ground. I got out, carefully, and walked over. It was my knife, the one I'd lost, lying in the dirt, blade pointing toward the tent. The sheath was missing. The handle looked clean. I picked it up and stood there for a long time. The forest didn't make a sound. That was enough for me. To first light, I packed everything up. I didn't even eat. I threw the tent, cooler, tarp, everything, into the back of the SUV without folding or organizing. I wanted out. I didn't even check the area for more clues. I just drove. The road out seemed longer, rougher, more winding. I kept checking the mirror, expecting to see someone behind me, maybe on foot, watching from the trees. But the forest was empty. When I got home, I left the gear in the SUV. I didn't unpack it for 2 days. I kept thinking about what happened, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe I dropped the knife. Maybe an animal dragged it off and somehow brought it back. Maybe the footsteps were a deer. But deep down, I knew better. Someone was out there. Someone saw me arrive. Someone watched me walk into the woods. Maybe they followed me to that abandoned camp. Maybe that wasn't abandoned at all. Maybe I walked right into their territory without realizing it. And the worst part, the part that sticks with me, was the knife. It wasn't just dropped near the tent. It was placed there, pointing at me, like a message. I haven't been camping since. Not really. I've gone on short hikes, day trips, but the overnight stuff, out in the middle of nowhere, no cell signal, no help, no one for miles? No, I'm done with that, because whoever was out there that night wasn't just passing through. They were waiting, watching. Maybe they'd been doing it for years. Maybe they still are. And I was lucky. That's the part one can't shake. I was lucky. I work as a counselor at a summer camp way out in the woods of Southern California. You wouldn't think deep wilderness when you think of SoCal, but this place was definitely out there. Mountains in the distance, miles of dense trees in every direction, dirt roads winding up steep hillsides with no guardrails, and barely enough room for 2 cars to pass in some places. If you forgot something from town, you had better plan on an hour's round trip minimum. Longer if you had to drive slowly after dark. The camp itself was surrounded by thick woods, the kind that never felt fully quiet even when there wasn't a soul moving. There were always the constant chirps, the rustles, the far-off sounds of some animal snapping twigs underfoot. We got all sorts of wildlife. Deer wandering near the cabins early in the morning, foxes skittering across paths at dusk, coyotes yipping at each other in the hills after dark. Occasionally, someone would spot a mountain lion, though I personally never saw one. Still, there were warning signs on some of the trails, advising campers to make noise and not hike alone. Some of the counselors joked that the camp was haunted. I never really bought into any of that, but I won't lie, there were some parts of the area that gave me a weird feeling. A section of the forest to the east of the main camp buildings had a strange old stone structure half sunk into the hillside, like the foundation of a cabin long gone. Trees had grown right through parts of it. The stones were worn and uneven, not stacked in any way that looked modern. Every once in a while, a kid would wander out there during free time and come back saying it felt creepy or they thought they saw someone in the woods. Usually just stories, but still. There was another area by the lake where the trees leaned in toward each other, twisted almost unnaturally. The way the sunlight came through there in the afternoon made long shadows that didn't always seem to move how they should. That's how it felt anyway, especially when you were walking alone. But again, I chalked it up to overactive imaginations, both mine and the campers. We told ghost stories around the fire for fun, but when the fire went out and we headed back to our bunks, most of us didn't think twice. This one night, though, I was standing outside my cabin after lights out. It was one of those warm nights when the air doesn't cool down much even after the sun goes down. You can hear everything more clearly. Twigs snapping, bugs buzzing, the distant chorus of frogs down by the lake. I was leaning against the railing, kind of zoned out, when another counselor came by and we started talking quietly so we wouldn't wake the kids. Just casual stuff, nothing weird. Then, out of nowhere, Sadie came tearing down the path past us with her entire cabin of teenage girls right behind her. All of them were dressed in black and looked totally freaked out. I don't just mean startled. I mean pale, eyes wide, completely panicked. Sadie didn't even slow down, just yelled out that they thought they heard a ghost and that once her campers were in bed, she'd come back and explain. I stood there stunned for a moment. Sadie wasn't the type to get shaken easily. She was calm, no nonsense, the kind of person you wanted with you during emergencies. So for her to bolt out of the woods like that, running full speed with a dozen girls behind her, that got my attention. About half an hour later, Sadie came back, walking fast but quieter this time. Her hair was tied up, and her face was still a little pale under the porch light. She looked serious, the way someone looks after something messes with them more than they expected. She told me she had taken her campers on a night hike, a kind of just-for-fun bonding thing. They'd all dressed in black and were pretending to be ninjas, sneaking around on the trails. She said they were laughing and whispering and having a good time until they got to a certain part of the trail near the western ridgeline. There was a thick patch of trees there, and the trail narrowed as it ran along the slope of a small hill. That's when they heard it. A voice, a faint help, like a small child calling out. At first it sounded like it was far off in the woods, beyond the tree line. But it came again, and again, each time a little louder and a little stranger. She said the voice didn't sound quite right. It still said help, still sounded like a child, but the tone shifted. It became warped, like a recording that had been played too many times. A distortion. The more it repeated, the more unnatural it sounded. Too high-pitched, too strained. It wasn't coming from any one place either. It echoed in a way that made it impossible to figure out which direction it was coming from. That was the final straw for her. She gathered the girls and ran back to camp. I could tell she wasn't exaggerating. Something out there had scared her. So we decided, against our better judgment, to check it out. We grabbed a couple of flashlights, but we didn't tell anyone else. Part of me thought we'd just go to the area, see nothing, and feel silly for even bothering. But part of me was curious. We walked quietly down the trail. The path curved through the trees and was mostly flat, but some parts dipped and rose with the slope of the land. Leaves rustled lightly in the breeze, and every few minutes we'd hear something small move off in the brush. Probably a raccoon or squirrel, but you couldn't tell in the dark. The light from our flashlights danced on the ground and caught on branches, making weird shapes that disappeared as fast as they appeared. We reached the area Sadie had described. It was darker there, not just because of the time, but because the trees formed a thick canopy overhead. The stars were hidden, and the air felt heavier. We stood still, listening. Then we heard it. Not help. Not anymore. Not exactly. It was a sound that started high, like a child crying, but stretched into something screeching and broken. It didn't come from a specific place. It came from everywhere at once, like it was vibrating through the whole forest. The worst part was how wrong it sounded. Not animal, not human, just wrong. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. Sadie looked at me, and we both turned and started walking back. Not quite running, but faster than we came. The sound happened again behind us, and I swear it sounded even closer this time. It echoed off the mountainside, impossible to trace. That made it worse. The fact that we couldn't pin it down, couldn't even point and say, it came from there. We made it back to camp and didn't stop until we were standing in the open clearing by the lodge. Only then did I feel like I could breathe properly. We started telling other counselors what had happened. Some laughed, some raised eyebrows. A few asked us to retell it again. The next morning, we had a staff meeting before breakfast. The camp director was going over the usual schedule changes and weather updates when they brought up something that made us both sink in our seats. They reminded us that bobcats lived in the area and that during certain times of the year, they make high-pitched yelping sounds at night that can sound like a child calling out. They said it wasn't dangerous, that the animals usually kept their distance, and that if we heard strange sounds, we should stay calm and not alarm the campers. Sadie and I looked at each other. Bobcats, of course. It explained the weird sound, the shifting echoes, the way it bounced off the hillside. We must have heard one, or maybe two, calling out from different spots. Maybe even a young one separated from its mother. We felt stupid, of course. The counselors didn't let us live it down for the rest of the summer. We became the punchline of a dozen fireside stories and lunchtime jokes. But here's the thing. I've heard coyotes. I've heard mountain lions in the distance. I've even heard a fox scream before, and that's a sound you don't forget. And yes, I've listened to bobcat cries online since then. Some of them do sound like kids yelling or something dying or something pretending to be human. But what we heard that night, it wasn't just a sound. It was a feeling, the kind of thing that makes your whole body go cold. It's easy to laugh in the morning when the sun's up and the birds are chirping. But at night, alone in the woods, the rules feel different. I still think about that night, about how it started as a fun, harmless game with a group of teenage girls playing pretend in the dark. About how fast that turned into something else. Something that made even the most level-headed among us run for safety. Probably was just a bobcat. But the forest doesn't always feel like it wants to be explained. Sometimes it just wants to be left alone. And sometimes, even when you know the science and the facts and the reasonable explanations, there's still a part of you that feels like you weren't supposed to be there. And that part of you doesn't forget. It started out simple, just a solo weekend trip to clear my head. I'd been working hard nonstop since the start of the year, stuck in the same routines, deadlines stacking up, living out of email and coffee cups. I needed something different. I didn't want to see another spreadsheet or hear another phone buzz. So I packed up my car with the basics, tent, food, stove, sleeping bag, and drove out into the hills just outside the Los Padres National Forest. I picked a free camping area I'd read about online, the kind where there are no rangers, no gates, just public land and dirt roads. I wanted quiet. The drive out there took me through a long, winding stretch of highway that turned into a gravel road with potholes deep enough to swallow a tire if you weren't paying attention. I kept driving until I didn't see another soul. No hikers, no RVs, not even an abandoned car on the shoulder. I liked that. I was looking for a pullout just off the side of the road that led to a small clearing people had used for dispersed camping. Nothing official, but enough flat ground to set up a tent and enough tree cover to feel tucked away. I got there just before dusk. I remember that distinctly because the sun was falling behind the ridgeline and the woods were beginning to go dark fast. I parked the car, grabbed my gear, and did a quick sweep of the area. It looked fine. There was an old fire ring made from stones someone had stacked in a circle, bits of charred wood in the middle, and even a couple tree stumps you could use as stools. I pitched the tent quickly and got a fire going while I still had some light. Dinner was instant noodles and a granola bar. I wasn't out there for the cuisine. I sat by the fire, sipping from my water bottle, feeling that sense of calm start to sink in. The quiet out there was different than the quiet at home. It was real silence. No humming from appliances, no traffic in the distance, no people talking through thin apartment walls. Just the pop of the fire, the creak of the trees, and the occasional call from a night bird somewhere out in the trees. I felt good. I went to bed a little after 9. It was getting cold by then, and the fire was dying out. I zipped up inside my tent, crawled into my bag, and lay there listening. That first night, I kept waking up. I don't sleep great the first night I camp, and every noise feels amplified in the dark. I heard something moving through the woods just after midnight, twigs snapping and leaves shifting underfoot. It didn't sound big, definitely not a bear or anything, but it kept pacing. I didn't have a watch on, but I could tell it went on for a while, back and forth, maybe 20 or 30 feet away. I froze in place, heart beating a little faster than I'd like to admit, clutching my knife even though I had no clue what I'd do with it. Eventually the sound stopped. Nothing dramatic, no scream or crash, just gone, like someone realized they were being too loud and decided to stop. I must have fallen asleep again because I woke up to sunlight hitting the side of the tent. Everything looked normal when I stepped outside. No footprints that I could find, no overturned gear. The woods had that early morning stillness that feels like the earth holding its breath before starting the day. I made oatmeal and coffee, took a short walk around the perimeter of my site, and tried not to think too much about the night before. Probably a raccoon, maybe a fox, definitely not a person. I would have heard something more, right? By mid-morning, I decided to explore. I packed a small day bag, threw in some snacks and water, and followed a faint trail leading deeper into the woods. It wasn't an official path, just a narrow dirt track people had made from use over the years. I didn't bring a GPS, but had a compass and my phone with a downloaded map just in case. I planned to be out for a couple hours, maybe make a loop and get back in time to relax for the afternoon. The trail wound through some thick groves of oak and pine. In some places, you could see old signs of life, rusty cans buried under leaves, bits of broken glass, even what looked like the remains of a foundation or fireplace deeper in the brush. I saw a few birds, a deer off in the distance, and nothing else. No other hikers, no people. That's what I liked about solo camping. You get to exist in the landscape without being seen. You just become part of it. It's peaceful, but there's something unnerving about it too. If something happened, no one would hear, no one would know. I started heading back around 1 in the afternoon, thinking about lunch and maybe reading by the fire pit for a while. But just as I was cutting through a grove of trees near the edge of a hill, I saw something that made me stop. It looked like a backpack. It was about 20 feet off the trail, wedged between some fallen branches, partially covered in dirt and leaves. Old, faded. I wasn't sure why, but something about it bothered me. Maybe because it looked like it had been there a long time, like whoever dropped it never came back for it. I hesitated, then walked toward it. The bag was torn in places, the zipper rusted and barely holding together. There were some items scattered around it. An empty water bottle, a cracked phone case, a sock. No ID, no wallet, nothing with a name. I opened the main compartment. Inside were a few things. A rain poncho, crushed granola bars, an old headlamp with corroded batteries. That was it. I stood there for a while trying to figure out what to do. Part of me thought I should take it back, maybe alert someone. But to who? There were no rangers out here, no station. And it wasn't like I could carry it all back with my own gear. Eventually, I just snapped a couple photos of the bag and left it where it was. Maybe it belonged to someone who got lost and found their way out. Or maybe they ditched it and moved on. I didn't know. That night, things felt different. I couldn't explain it, but the air felt heavier somehow, and the silence wasn't peaceful anymore. Felt like everything was waiting. I made a fire again, ate another simple meal, but couldn't shake the unease that was building in me. I kept thinking about that backpack, the way it was just sitting there, like it had been waiting to be found. When I finally got into the tent for the night, I left my boots near the entrance and my knife within arm's reach. I told myself I was being paranoid, just tired. My brain was turning shadows into stories. But around 2 in the morning, I woke up again. There were footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate, not an animal. I lay there completely still, holding my breath. The footsteps circled the tent once, then again. I couldn't see anything through the fabric, but I could feel it. Someone was out there, not running, not stumbling, just walking slowly around the tent. The sound of boots on leaves, twigs snapping lightly underfoot. Then the sound stopped directly behind me. I could feel a presence, not 6 inches away, just beyond the thin wall of nylon. No breathing, no light, just stillness. I don't know how long I stayed frozen like that. Felt like hours, but it was probably 10 minutes. Eventually, the footsteps started again. Faint, this time walking away into the woods. They didn't run. They didn't speak. Just walked off until I couldn't hear them anymore. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat up, clutching the knife, ears straining for any sound. I waited until the sky started to lighten before stepping outside. Everything looked untouched. No footprints that I could see, though the forest floor made it hard to tell. I broke camp fast, didn't even eat, just packed everything up in under 15 minutes and loaded it into the car. I didn't feel safe out there anymore. I drove straight back to town and didn't stop until I hit pavement. Back home, I went through the photos I'd taken, mostly trees, trail markers, and that one shot of the backpack. I thought maybe I'd report it, maybe post something online. But when I tried to look up missing persons cases in the area, I couldn't find anything that matched. And the weirdest part? When I went back through my phone later that day, the photo of the backpack was gone. Not deleted, just never there. I checked the memory, the file logs, even used recovery software. Nothing. It was like I never took it. I've been camping since then, but never alone. And never without a GPS, a backup phone, and someone knowing exactly where I'm going. Whatever happened out there, I can't explain it. I didn't see a ghost. I didn't find a body. But I know what I heard, and I know what I felt. Something or someone was out there that night and they were watching me, and they knew exactly where I was. I've worked as a counselor at a summer camp in Southern California for a few years now. It's one of those places that feels like it hasn't been touched by time. Deep in the woods, miles from the nearest gas station or grocery store, the camp sits surrounded by thick forest and low rolling mountains that turn golden in the evenings. We don't get cell service out there, maybe a single bar if you hike up to the water tower on the ridge. It's remote in the way that makes it feel like anything could happen and no one would ever know. The camp itself is spread out over a pretty big area. There's a main mess hall in the center, a few admin buildings, and then the cabins stretch out around that in loops and lines, tucked among the trees. The trails leading out go for miles in all directions, some of them official, some just old worn paths that people have been using for decades. You could follow one for hours and not see another person. We get all sorts of wildlife. Deer wander through in the mornings like they own the place. Foxes slink around the edges of the property, mostly at night. You hear coyotes howling almost every evening, high-pitched yips and wails echoing across the hills. It's common and we're used to it. Once or twice a summer, someone spots a mountain lion from a distance, but they tend to keep to themselves. Still, we do the safety drills and keep flashlights and bear spray just in case. Some areas of the camp feel different than others. There are spots where the trees grow thicker, the air seems a bit heavier, and you get that weird sensation that someone's watching you even when you know no one is. There's a fire circle past the outer cabins that most counselors avoid at night. Not because of any rule, just because it feels off. It's not haunted, at least not in any real sense, but the vibe is strange. Old stone foundations are hidden under the overgrowth in some places, like buildings used to be there long ago and nature swallowed them up. Nobody knows who lived there or when, just that they're there. Stuff like that gives the place a kind of quiet, lingering history you can't shake off. That summer, everything was running like usual. We had a full group, kids from all over California, some from out of state. I had a group of younger boys, maybe 8 to 10 years old, pretty manageable. A few of them were homesick the first night, but they got over it quickly. We had hiking, canoeing, crafts, and the usual camp games. Days were busy and hot. Nights were quiet except for the bugs and distant animal calls. One night, after lights out, I was standing outside my cabin talking with another counselor. We kept our voices low since our kids were already in bed. The moon was barely out, just a sliver through the trees, and the woods were darker than usual. It was one of those nights where the shadows seemed to move if you looked too long. That's when it happened. From around the curve in the trail came Sadie, another counselor who was in charge of one of the older girls' cabins. She was sprinting, her headlamp bouncing wildly, and behind her were all 12 of her teenage campers, all of them dressed in black. They weren't just walking fast, they were full-on running. Panic-level running. I'd never seen anything like it. Sadie didn't stop, just shouted something about hearing a ghost and that she'd be back in a bit to explain. Then they disappeared into the shadows, her girls following close behind. Their footsteps thudded against the dirt path, fading into the distance. Me and the counselor I was with just looked at each other, unsure what we'd just seen. Sadie isn't the kind of person who panics. She's calm in emergencies, good at managing kids, and not someone who's easily scared. So whatever had happened, it had to be real enough to shake her. About half an hour later, true to her word, she came back alone, breathing a bit hard but no longer running. Her headlamp was steadier now, her face pale but composed. She explained that she'd taken her girls on a night hike. It was something she did each session, a little tradition where they'd all dress in black and sneak through the trails pretending to be ninjas. It was harmless fun, and the girls loved it. They'd creep through the woods, whisper, do stealth games. Nothing serious. She'd done it a dozen times before with no issues. But on their way back, they'd hit a particularly dark section of trail, where the trees grow close and the underbrush thickens. That's when they heard it. At first, it sounded like a faint voice, just barely audible above the wind through the branches. Help! A child's voice, small and far away. They paused, trying to figure out if they'd imagined it. Then they heard it again. Help! Only this time it was stranger, drawn out too long, almost echoing in a way that didn't match the acoustics of the forest. Then again, and again. Each time they heard it, it sounded more warped, like someone trying to mimic a child's voice but getting it wrong. Like if someone who had never heard a human before was trying to replicate one from memory. Sadie said the girls were already on edge from being out in the dark, and this sent them over. She didn't want to take any chances, so she gathered everyone and ran them back to camp. None of them spoke much on the way, just the sound of running feet and frantic breathing. Once they were back, she got the girls settled, told them it was probably some animal or another group playing a prank, and made her way back to me. I was already getting that tight feeling in my chest, the one you get when something's not right and you know you're about to do something you shouldn't but you're gonna do it anyway. We decided to check it out. We grabbed headlamps, flashlights, and took the same trail Sadie had been on. It was silent now. We walked slowly, alert. Every crunch of leaves underfoot sounded louder than it should. The trees were dense on either side, and the air felt still and damp, like it does right before a storm. Even though there wasn't a cloud in the sky, we reached the area she described. It looked normal, just a part of the woods like any other. But I'll be honest, standing there, I felt something. Not cold exactly, just off, like the air had weight. That's when we heard it. Not help exactly, not anymore. It was louder than she'd described. Rougher, a screeching, high-pitched sound that started like a word and then twisted into something unrecognizable. It echoed across the trees, not coming from one point, but from everywhere at once, like it was bouncing off the hills or being thrown from every direction. We froze. I scanned the forest with my flashlight, expecting to see someone, something, anything, but there was nothing. Just trees, shadows, and the growing sense that we were not supposed to be there. The sound came again. This time it didn't even try to sound like a word. It was a wail, a shriek, distorted and ragged. If someone had told me it was an animal, I might have believed them, but nothing I'd ever heard sounded like that. It was like something trying to call out in a voice it didn't quite have. That was enough for us. We turned and walked, fast at first, then faster. By the time we reached the edge of camp, we were out of breath and dripping sweat. We didn't talk. We just sat on a bench near the mess hall for a while, collecting ourselves. Later that night, we told the other counselors. Some of them laughed it off. Others looked uneasy. One or two mentioned having heard weird things in the woods before but brushed it off as owls or other animals. It was the kind of story that makes the rounds fast. We were the main topic of every whispered campfire conversation the next couple days. Then came the meeting. The camp director called all the counselors together after lunch the next day. She was calm, smiling, but you could tell she knew what we were talking about. She reminded us that bobcats lived in the area. They weren't dangerous, rarely approached humans, but they did make strange sounds. Yelps, screeches, high-pitched calls that sometimes sounded eerily human, especially during mating season or if they were fighting. She explained that what we heard was likely one of those calls echoing through the canyon. They could bounce off the terrain and sound like they were coming from everywhere. No one was in danger. Still, we were advised not to take campers too far out at night anymore, and if we did, to stay near established paths and keep the hikes short. We nodded, said we understood, and left the meeting with a mix of relief and lingering unease. Sadie and I got teased about it for the rest of the summer. The ninja ghost incident, they called it. Some of the campers overheard bits and pieces and made up their own stories. By the end of the season, it had grown into a full-blown urban legend about ghost children in the woods. But even knowing what it likely was, a bobcat, a normal animal doing normal things, I still remember the way that sound made my skin crawl. The way it echoed not just through the forest, but into your chest. The way it didn't seem to belong. I don't think I'll ever forget that night. It wasn't ghosts or anything supernatural. It was probably just nature being weird and louder than we expected. But it reminded me how little control we have out there, how much the forest keeps to itself, how easily we forget that we're visitors in a place far older and stranger than we realize. Every summer since, I still work that camp. I still love it. The kids, the trails, the late-night fire circles. But I don't hike that far at night anymore. I don't stray from the path once the sun goes down. And when the coyotes start howling, or I hear something strange in the dark, I don't go looking for answers. Some things you just let be.